In my hospital room, my sister pulled my monitor cord and said, "You always fake being sick." But what happened next exposed a family secret so shocking, I couldn't believe my own mother had been in on it the whole time. I thought I was losing my mind. Years of being called dramatic, overly sensitive, attention-seeking had convinced me maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. But when that nurse walked through the door and said, "I heard everything," my entire reality shifted. The truth I'd been gaslighted out of believing for 27 years was finally revealed. Caught on hospital security cameras, witnessed by people who had no reason to lie for me or against me. What my family didn't know was that their betrayal, the ultimate backstab, would lead to criminal charges, restraining orders, and a reckoning they never saw coming. The infidelity wasn't romantic, it was familial. My own blood had cheated me out of basic human dignity, lied about my character to everyone we knew. And then, when I was at my most vulnerable, injured and helpless in a hospital bed, tried to humiliate me one last time by disconnecting my medical equipment. They thought they could get away with it like they'd gotten away with everything else. But what they didn't expect was that someone was listening. Someone was watching. Someone who wasn't part of our sick family dynamic finally saw them for what they really were. And then, everything they'd built on lies started to crumble. This is the story of how I went from being the scapegoat who always exaggerates to the woman who walked away from her entire family and never looked back. What I discovered about revenge, payback, and real justice changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and forgiveness. I wasn't even fully conscious when I heard her voice cutting through the beeping machines. My whole body ached from the crash. Every breath felt like broken glass scraping my ribs. And there she was, my own sister standing over my hospital bed with that look I knew too well. "Oh, please, Valerie," she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. "You've always been so dramatic, always needing attention." I tried to move, tried to speak, but my mouth was dry and my head was spinning from whatever pain medication they'd pumped into me. The betrayal wasn't new. It never was with Madison. But lying there helpless, unable to defend myself, made every word cut deeper than any injury from the accident. My mother stood in the corner, arms crossed, nodding along like Madison was delivering some profound truth instead of verbally attacking her daughter in a hospital bed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd just survived a head-on collision, my car was totaled, and instead of comfort, I was getting accusations. "The doctor said she's fine," my mother added coldly, barely looking at me. "Just a few bruises, nothing serious." The humiliation of it all washed over me in waves. Here I was, hooked up to monitors, my body screaming in pain, and my own family was calling me a liar. Every time I'd ever complained about anything, every childhood illness, every moment I'd needed support, it all flashed before me as evidence in their case against my character. Madison moved closer to my bed, her fingers trailing along the IV stand with unsettling casualty. "You know what your problem is?" she whispered, loud enough for Mom to hear, but quiet enough to sound intimate, conspiratorial. "You've never been able to handle real life without making everything about you." My heart rate monitor started beeping faster. I could see the numbers climbing on the screen beside me, and instead of concern, Madison smirked. The family drama that had simmered for years was boiling over, right here in this sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and broken trust. I wanted to scream, to tell them both exactly what I thought of their cruelty, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The truth was, this wasn't about the accident at all. This was about every time Madison had been caught doing something wrong and somehow made it my fault. This was about my mother's golden child never being held accountable while I carried the shame for both of us. "She's probably faking half the pain just to get sympathy," Madison continued, her voice rising now, performing for our mother. I watched Mom's face, waiting, hoping for some flicker of maternal instinct to kick in, but there was nothing. Just that familiar blank expression she wore whenever Madison attacked me, that willful blindness that had defined my entire childhood. Then Madison did something that made my blood run cold. She glanced toward the door, then at our mother, who gave her a subtle nod, the same silent permission she'd given her my whole life. Madison reached over and grabbed the cord connected to my heart monitor, her fingers wrapping around it with deliberate slowness. "Let's see how sick you really are," she said, that same twisted smile playing at her lips. My mother didn't move, didn't protest, just watched with mild curiosity, as if this was all some harmless experiment. The backstabbed feeling that flooded through me wasn't just emotional anymore. It was physical, tangible, dangerous. I tried to grab her hand, to stop her, but my body wouldn't cooperate, still too weak from the trauma of the crash and the medication coursing through my veins. I saw her fingers tighten on that cord, saw the intent in her eyes, and in that split second, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just family betrayal or sibling rivalry anymore. This was something darker, something that had been building for years underneath all the gaslighting and emotional abuse. My dignity had been stripped away so many times I'd lost count, but now my actual safety was on the line. The monitor beside me continued its steady beeping, completely unaware that my sister's hand was seconds away from silencing it, and I couldn't do anything but lie there and wait for whatever came next. Madison's fingers yanked the cord with such casual cruelty it took my brain a second to process what was happening. The alarm didn't scream immediately. There was a brief delay, just long enough for Madison to smirk. Then the monitor went silent. That steady beeping that had been tracking my heartbeat just stopped, and the room fell into a terrifying quiet. "See?" she said, turning to our mother with theatrical satisfaction. Nothing wrong with her at all. Just Valerie being Valerie, milking this for everything it's worth. The revenge she must have felt in that moment, the sick payback for whatever imagined slight I'd committed by existing, by surviving, by daring to need help. It was written all over her face. I couldn't believe this was real, that my own sister had just disconnected my medical equipment while I lay there unable to fight back. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but there was no machine to show it anymore, no proof of my distress. The infidelity of it all, not romantic betrayal, but the breaking of that fundamental family bond, that sacred trust between siblings, hit me harder than the car that had landed me here. "Madison, don't you think—" I tried to speak, but my voice was too weak, too broken. She cut me off immediately. "Don't I think what? That you're finally getting called out for your constant drama?" My mother stood there watching, and her silence was its own form of violence, her complicity louder than any words could have been. But then I heard footsteps rushing down the hallway, quick and purposeful. A nurse burst through the door, her eyes immediately landing on the disconnected monitor, then on Madison's hand still holding the cord. "What is going on in here?" Her voice was sharp, authoritative, cutting through the toxic fog my family had created. Madison's face shifted instantly, from smugness to confusion to something that almost looked like fear. Madison stammered. But the nurse wasn't listening to her excuses. She moved past my sister, reconnecting my monitor with practiced efficiency, and the blessed sound of that steady beep filled the room again. "I heard everything," the nurse said, her voice low and controlled, but I could hear the anger beneath it. "I was right outside that door." The shocking realization dawned on Madison's face. She'd been caught, actually caught, by someone who wasn't part of our family's twisted dynamic. "She disconnected a patient's medical monitoring equipment," the nurse continued, pulling out her phone. "That's not just inappropriate, that's a criminal offense." My mother finally moved, finally spoke, but only to defend Madison. "Now wait a minute, you don't understand the situation." But the nurse cut her off with a look that could freeze fire. "What I understand is that I just witnessed someone interfere with potentially life-saving equipment." The karma of this moment wasn't lost on me, even through my pain and shock. All those years of Madison getting away with everything, of my mother covering for her, explaining away her cruelty as jokes or misunderstandings, it was all crashing down in this hospital room. "I'm calling security and the police," the nurse said firmly, her hand already on her phone. "Neither of you are to touch this patient or any equipment in this room." I watched Madison's face drain of color, watched my mother's mouth open and close like a fish out of water. The justice I'd never thought I'd see, the validation I'd spent my entire life craving, was happening in real time, delivered by a stranger who'd witnessed 30 seconds of what I'd endured for 27 years. Within minutes, the room filled with people, hospital security, another nurse, someone from administration. My mother was protesting loudly now, demanding to speak to someone in charge, threatening lawsuits, doing that thing she always did when Madison faced consequences. But this time, her voice held a note of panic I'd never heard before. This time, there were witnesses who didn't share our last name, who hadn't been conditioned to dismiss everything I said, who could see the truth laid bare in front of them. The vengeance I felt wasn't hot and angry. It was cold and quiet, the kind that comes from watching your abusers finally face someone they couldn't manipulate. The police arrived faster than I expected, their presence transforming my hospital room into something that felt both surreal and intensely validating. 2 officers stood near the door while the head nurse explained what she'd witnessed, her testimony clear and unwavering. My mother kept interrupting, her voice climbing higher with each attempt. "This is a family matter. You can't just—" But one of the officers held up his hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, interfering with medical equipment is not a family matter, it's a crime." I watched Madison shrink back against the wall, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog under a harsh sun. The hospital's security footage told a story my family couldn't talk their way out of. The head of security pulled up the recording on a tablet, showing it to the officers, clear evidence of Madison reaching for that cord, pulling it, my mother standing by without intervention. "We'll need statements from both of you," one officer said, gesturing to my mother and sister. The self-worth I'd lost over years of being called dramatic, overly sensitive, attention-seeking, it started creeping back into my chest with every official question, every documented detail. This wasn't just in my head anymore. This was real, recorded, witnessed by people whose job was to see the truth. Then Dr. Morrison, the physician who'd been treating me since the ambulance brought me in, entered with a thick folder. "Officers, there's something else you should know," she said, her expression grave. "This isn't the first time Madison Bradley has attempted to access her sister's medical information or interfere with her care." My breath caught. What was she talking about? Dr. Morrison opened the folder, revealing printed emails and access logs. 3 days ago, someone tried to gain unauthorized access to Valerie's medical records from outside the hospital. The IP address traced back to Madison Bradley. When denied, she called our records department claiming to be Valerie's medical proxy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The betrayal ran so much deeper than I'd imagined. She also contacted Valerie's previous physician in Seattle trying to obtain records, Dr. Morrison continued, claiming her sister had been exaggerating medical conditions for years and requesting documentation to prove it. The shocking revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been unconscious from the accident, while I'd been in surgery, Madison had been working behind the scenes to discredit me, to build some kind of case against my character. The cheated feeling that washed over me wasn't about romance. It was about being robbed of the one thing that should have been sacred. My right to medical care without sabotage. My mother's face had gone pale, but not from shame. From calculation. I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to protect her golden child from consequences that were finally catching up. She was just worried about her sister, Mom tried, her voice lacking its usual conviction. She wanted to make sure Valerie was getting appropriate care, but Dr. Morrison shook her head. Attempting to access someone's medical records without authorization, impersonating a medical proxy, and now physically disconnecting medical monitoring equipment, this shows a pattern of deliberate interference, not concern. One of the officers made a note in his book, then looked at my mother and Madison with an expression that held no sympathy. "We're going to need you both to come down to the station to give formal statements," he said. The justice of watching them being escorted toward the door, no longer in control of the narrative, no longer able to gaslight everyone in the room. It was overwhelming. "You can't be serious," my mother hissed at the officers. "We're her family." But the second officer responded with words I'd waited my whole life to hear someone say to her. "That's exactly what makes this so serious. You should have been protecting her, not harming her." I spent 3 more days in the hospital recovering from the accident, and my phone became a weapon of psychological warfare. The messages started the moment my mother and Madison were released from the police station. No charges filed yet, but an investigation opened. "You've destroyed this family," my mother's text read. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Then Madison, "You always have to be the victim, don't you? You've turned everyone against me over nothing." The family betrayal that had been covert for so long was now screaming at me through a screen, raw and undeniable. I couldn't believe they still thought they were the victims in this situation, still thought I was the problem. The texts escalated quickly, from guilt-tripping to outright threats. "Wait until Dad finds out what you've done. You'll regret making us look like criminals. Family is supposed to protect each other, but you've always been selfish." I saved every message. My lawyer, appointed through the hospital's victim advocacy program, told me to document everything. Then came the call from my bank, automated and urgent. Suspicious activity on my joint checking account. My hands shook as I logged in to see that every dollar had been transferred out. $8,000 I'd been saving for months. Gone. The account had my mother's name on it from years ago when I was in college. Something I'd never bothered to change, never thought I'd need to. When I called my mother about it, her voice was ice. "That money was family money, Valerie. You don't get to keep it after what you've done to us." The revenge they were taking felt petty and desperate, but it was also terrifyingly effective. I was stuck in a hospital bed, injured and vulnerable, while they systematically tried to dismantle my life. Next came a call from my home insurance company. Someone had tried to change my beneficiary to Madison Bradley, claiming to be me. They'd caught it only because the signatures didn't match. "We flagged it as potential fraud," the representative said. "You might want to file a police report." The payback my family was orchestrating wasn't just emotional. It was financial, logistical, designed to leave me as helpless as possible. I contacted my landlord and warned him that no one but me had permission to access my apartment. He promised to be vigilant, but 2 days later he called. "Your mother was here with a key, said she needed to get your things, because you were unable to care for yourself." I didn't let her in, but she wasn't happy. The lied-to feeling, the manipulation, the constant gaslighting. It was all there, but now aimed at everyone in my life, trying to isolate me, trying to take control. Then came the most terrifying message of all, not from my mother or Madison, but from an unknown number. "Your family says you're unstable and dangerous. They're worried about you. We should talk." I showed it to the nurse, who immediately called hospital security. "This is escalating," she said, her concern evident. The dignity I was trying to reclaim felt constantly under attack, like every step forward was met with 2 steps back from people who should have loved me. I realized then that getting out of the hospital wasn't going to mean safety. It was going to mean war. My discharge day arrived with a police escort recommendation. "Given the circumstances and the ongoing harassment," Dr. Morrison explained, "we think it's best if you don't go home alone." The shocking reality of needing police protection from my own family hadn't fully sunk in yet. But as I gathered my belongings, my phone buzzed again. This time a photo from Madison showing her standing in front of my apartment building. No caption needed. The message was clear. They knew where I lived, and they were coming for me. I'd been home for less than 12 hours when the pounding on my door started. It was past midnight, and the sound echoed through my small apartment like thunder. "Valerie, open this door right now." My mother's voice, shrill and demanding, cut through the walls. I sat frozen on my couch, phone in hand, debating whether to call the police. "We need to talk about this like a family." Madison's voice joined in. But there was nothing familial about the way they were trying to force their way into my space. The terror that gripped me wasn't paranoia. It was the justified fear of someone who'd just watched her family reveal exactly how far they were willing to go. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called 911, whispering my address and the situation while they continued to pound and yell. "She's being dramatic again," I heard my mother say to someone else. Had they brought backup? The betrayal of being hunted by the people who gave you life, who were supposed to protect you, hit different when you could hear their voices through your door at midnight. The operator stayed on the line with me until 2 police cars pulled up outside. Through my window, I watched the officers approach my mother and Madison, watched the argument that followed, watched my mother's indignant gestures and Madison's tears. The officers spoke with them for 15 minutes before coming to my door. I let them in, showed them the restraining order my lawyer had filed that afternoon, showed them the threatening messages, the timeline of harassment. "They violated the order by coming here," one officer explained. "We can arrest them or issue a citation." I chose citation. I wasn't ready for the nuclear option yet, some part of me still hoping this could de-escalate. But as the officers walked back to their cars, my mother turned and looked directly at my window. Even from the 3rd floor, I could see the hatred in her eyes, the promise that this wasn't over. 2 days later, someone knocked on my door mid-afternoon, a delivery driver with flowers. "For Valerie Chen," he said cheerfully. The card read, "We're sorry. Let's fix this. Love, Mom." I threw them in the trash, thorns and all. That evening, another knock, this time a man I'd never seen before, claiming to be from the building's maintenance, needing to check my plumbing. My landlord had sent no such notice. I called him to verify, and his response made my skin crawl. "I didn't send anyone. Don't open that door." The karma of my family's actions was catching up to them in the form of criminal charges and restraining orders, but they were too far gone in their narrative to stop. The police came again. This time I called them about the fake maintenance man. They found him waiting in the stairwell, and after questioning, he admitted my sister had paid him $200 to get into my apartment and retrieve some family items. The shocking escalation from verbal abuse to what was essentially attempted breaking and entering would have seemed unbelievable to anyone who didn't know my family. But I knew. I'd watched them operate outside normal boundaries my entire life, watched them rewrite reality to suit their needs, watched them punish anyone who dared to speak the truth. My lawyer called that evening with news. "We have enough for a permanent restraining order and harassment charges. The DA is also looking at the hospital incident more seriously given the ongoing pattern." The justice I'd been seeking was building, piece by piece, documented incident by documented incident. But justice wasn't protection, not yet. What I didn't know then was that even silence would eventually provoke one last attempt to pull me back in. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was instantly familiar. My Aunt Rebecca. My mother's younger sister. "Valerie, I heard what happened," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Your Uncle Tom and I want you to come stay with us in Portland." I hadn't spoken to my aunt in years, not since my mother had systematically cut off that side of the family over some perceived slight I'd never fully understood. The vengeance my mother had taken against anyone who questioned her had included isolating me from relatives who might have offered a different perspective, a safer harbor. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I started, but Aunt Rebecca cut me off. "Valerie, your mother has been telling everyone in the family that you've had a mental breakdown, that you attacked Madison in the hospital." The lied version of events didn't surprise me, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "But I called the hospital directly," Rebecca continued. "I spoke with Dr. Morrison. I know the truth." Those 4 words, "I know the truth," broke something open inside me that I'd been holding closed for survival. Someone believed me. Someone from my actual family believed me. "Pack what you need. Tom and I are driving down tomorrow to get you." They arrived at dawn, my uncle's truck pulling up as the sun was just starting to rise over Seattle. I'd spent the night throwing essentials into suitcases, paralyzed by the decision to actually leave, to actually accept help. The family drama that had consumed my entire existence felt both impossible to explain and desperately necessary to escape. "Your mother drained your bank account?" Uncle Tom asked as he loaded my bags, his jaw tight. "And tried to change your insurance beneficiary?" Aunt Rebecca was on her phone, already talking to someone about lawyers, about financial fraud, about holding people accountable. The drive to Portland was 4 hours of revelations. Aunt Rebecca told me about the real reason for the family rift. My mother had stolen money from their father's estate and blamed Rebecca for questioning the discrepancy. "She's done this before," Rebecca said quietly. "The golden child and scapegoat thing, the gaslighting, the financial manipulation. She did it to me, to your grandmother before she passed." The shocking pattern extended beyond just me and Madison. It was generational, practiced, refined over decades. "I tried to warn you when you were younger, but your mother made sure you and I never spent time alone together." Uncle Tom called his lawyer from the road, putting it on speaker so I could hear. "We need to file for emergency protection and get her completely separated from any shared assets," the lawyer advised. "Also, document everything about the family's financial access to her accounts, insurance, property." They talked about me like I was precious cargo that needed protecting, like my safety mattered, like the betrayal I'd experienced was real and serious and worthy of legal action. The reclaiming of my own narrative, my own truth, happened somewhere on I-5 between Seattle and Portland, in the cab of my uncle's truck with two people who'd been strangers made into family by mutual recognition of abuse. We pulled up to their house in northeast Portland just after noon, a quiet street lined with trees, nothing like the urban apartment where I'd been living in fear. "You'll stay in the guest room as long as you need," Aunt Rebecca said, leading me inside. "And tomorrow, we're going to dismantle every bit of access your mother and sister have to your life." The dignity I'd lost over 27 years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. It started coming back in that moment, standing in my aunt's kitchen while she made me tea and promised me safety, while Uncle Tom made phone calls to banks and insurance companies and lawyers, while someone finally fought for me instead of against me. The next morning, I sat in Uncle Tom's lawyer's office with a folder an inch thick, bank statements, text messages, hospital reports, police records. "This is one of the clearest cases of family financial abuse and harassment I've seen," the attorney said, flipping through the documentation. Within a week, we'd frozen all accounts with my mother's name on them, filed formal fraud complaints with 3 different banks, and submitted evidence to the DA's office for criminal charges. The justice system moved slowly, but it moved, and every certified letter, every court filing, every official document felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. Aunt Rebecca went further. She called every family member, cousins, great-aunts, family friends, and told them the truth. Not my mother's version, the actual documented truth. "Your mother is telling everyone you're mentally ill," Rebecca said, "so we're getting ahead of it." She sent the police reports, the hospital security footage, the restraining order documentation. Some relatives believed her, some didn't. But the information was out there, competing with my mother's narrative for the first time in my life. The payback wasn't about revenge, it was about reality, about making sure the truth existed somewhere outside my own head. The bank called with good news. They'd recovered $6,200 of the stolen money and were pursuing the rest through fraud recovery channels. "The transfer was clearly unauthorized," the investigator explained. "Your mother used knowledge of your security questions to bypass protections." Every dollar returned felt like a small victory against the larger violation. My insurance company sent a formal letter documenting the attempted beneficiary fraud, which my lawyer added to the growing case file. "These aren't isolated incidents," she explained. "This is a pattern, and patterns are prosecutable." The restraining order became permanent 3 weeks later. The judge listened to Dr. Morrison's testimony, reviewed the hospital footage, read the threatening texts. "This protection is granted for a period of 5 years, the judge declared, with potential for renewal." Madison sat beside my mother in the courtroom, both of them dressed carefully, performing respectability. But the evidence spoke louder than their appearance. The defendants are prohibited from any contact, direct or indirect, with the plaintiff, the judge continued. Violation will result in immediate arrest. I watched them leave the courtroom, my mother's hand gripping Madison's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. The vengeance I felt wasn't satisfaction, it was exhaustion. This should have been my family. These should have been the people celebrating my survival from a car accident, not the ones I needed a court order to keep away from me. Aunt Rebecca squeezed my hand. "It's done," she whispered. "They can't touch you anymore." But I knew better. Legal protection was one thing. Actually, being free of them was something else entirely. 3 months after the restraining order, I made a decision. I didn't tell anyone except Uncle Tom and Aunt Rebecca. I applied for jobs in different cities, Chicago, Austin, Denver, places where my mother's network didn't extend, where I could disappear into the anonymity of a new life. When the offer came from a marketing firm in Denver, I accepted it the same day. "You don't have to run," Aunt Rebecca said gently, but I shook my head. "This isn't running. This is choosing peace." I didn't announce my move on social media. I didn't tell extended family. I simply hired movers, packed my life into boxes, and left Portland on a Tuesday morning in March. The infidelity my family had committed against the basic covenant of protection and love deserved no explanation, no closure, no dramatic final confrontation. My revenge was silence. My payback was absence. The karma they'd created would catch up to them without me there to absorb it, deflect it, or carry the blame for it. Denver welcomed me with cold spring air and mountain views. I found a small apartment in Capitol Hill, a neighborhood where no one knew my name or my history. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, created email addresses my mother couldn't guess. The backstabbed wound in my chest, the one that had been bleeding for 27 years, finally started to scab over. Not healing. Not yet. But at least not actively hemorrhaging anymore. I made new friends slowly, carefully. When they asked about my family, I kept it vague. "We're not close," I'd say, and leave it at that. The truth was too heavy for casual conversation, too complex for people who'd never experienced that particular kind of betrayal. I started therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind my mother had forced me into as a teenager to fix my attitude problem. My therapist nodded when I described the scapegoating, the golden child dynamic, the medical sabotage. "You're describing severe emotional abuse and neglect," she said matter-of-factly. "Your response was survival, not dysfunction." 6 months into my new life, my lawyer called. The DA filed charges: fraud, harassment, interference with medical care. Your mother and sister both took plea deals. The justice I'd sought was happening without me even being present for it. They'll have probation, mandatory counseling, and restitution payments for the stolen money. It should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt like the final page of a book I'd been forced to read. "There's one more thing," the lawyer said. "Your mother's lawyer reached out. She wants to reconcile." The humiliation I'd experienced in that hospital room, the shamed feeling of being called a liar while hooked up to machines tracking my trauma, none of it would be erased by an apology that came only after legal consequences. "Tell them no," I said firmly. "Tell them I'm not interested in reconciliation, contact, or any relationship moving forward." The shocked silence on the other end of the line told me my lawyer hadn't expected such a clear boundary. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, and I meant it. A year after leaving Seattle, I sat on my balcony in Denver watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. My phone buzzed, not with threats or manipulation, but with a text from a colleague about weekend hiking plans. The peace I'd found wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet mornings with coffee, evenings with books I actually wanted to read, friendships built on honesty instead of survival. Sometimes I still woke up expecting the pounding on the door, the threatening messages, the next escalation. But the door stayed quiet. My phone stayed calm. The restraining order had teeth, and my mother valued her reputation too much to violate it publicly. The dignity I'd spent my whole life begging for, I simply gave to myself by removing the people who refused to recognize it. Aunt Rebecca called monthly, updating me on family gossip I no longer felt connected to. "Your mother tells people you moved for work," Rebecca reported. "She's rewritten the whole thing." I laughed. Of course she had. The truth was too damaging to her image, so she'd created a new story where I was the distant daughter who chose career over family. "Let her tell whatever story she needs," I said. The cheated feeling, the betrayal, the years of lies. None of it mattered anymore because I wasn't participating in the narrative. My therapist asked me once if I felt guilty about cutting off my family. "No," I answered honestly. "I feel relieved." The self-worth I'd been building didn't come from their approval or acknowledgement. It came from recognizing that love shouldn't require defending yourself from the people claiming to provide it. Real family, like Aunt Rebecca and Uncle Tom, showed up when you were vulnerable and protected you instead of exploiting the vulnerability. I built a life in Denver that my mother knew nothing about. My job, my apartment, my friends, my routines. She had no access, no information, no way to insert herself into my healing. The reclaiming wasn't about taking back what she'd stolen. It was about creating something entirely new that she'd never touched. Every morning I woke up without fear was a small revolution. Every friendship I built on truth was an act of defiance against the lies she'd trained me to accept. The shocking truth I'd learned was this: you don't heal from family trauma by fixing the family. You heal by building a life where their dysfunction can't reach you. I couldn't believe moments that used to define my existence. I couldn't believe she said that. I couldn't believe they did this. Transformed into, I can't believe I'm finally free. And that freedom, that quiet, autonomous, self-directed peace, was the best revenge I never knew I needed. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever been called dramatic or overly sensitive when you were just trying to survive? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, your truth matters even if your family tried to bury it. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted them? Or would you have chosen silence and distance like I did? Do you think I should have given them a chance to reconcile? Or was walking away the only real path to peace? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective because family betrayal is one of those things nobody talks about openly, but so many of us carry in secret. And let me ask you this. Do you believe in karma, or do you think we have to create our own justice? Because watching my family face legal consequences felt surreal, almost like the universe was finally balancing the scales. But the real freedom came from something quieter, just removing them from my life entirely and refusing to let their narrative define me anymore. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt gaslit by your own family or humiliated by people who should have loved you, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I share real stories about family dysfunction, narcissistic dynamics, and the messy, complicated journey of reclaiming your self-worth from people who tried to destroy it. These aren't surface-level motivational posts. These are the truths nobody wants to admit about what really happens behind closed doors in families that look perfect from the outside. Your comment could be the validation someone else needs to hear today. Your story might be the thing that makes another person realize they're not crazy. They're not the problem. They're just surviving a situation that was designed to make them doubt their own reality. So share it. Be honest. Let's build a community where the truth is more important than keeping up appearances. I'll see you in the next one. And trust me, the insights we're uncovering about family dynamics, manipulation, and true healing are only getting deeper.